You probably think you know ancient Egypt, pyramids, pharaohs, golden masks, and ancient gods. But the real story of Egypt is far darker and far more mysterious than most people realize. This was a civilization obsessed with death, not as an end, but as a transformation. Everything they built, everything they believed, everything they feared was connected to what happens after life. Temples were not just places of worship. They were gateways. The pyramids were not just tombs. They were machines built to protect something beyond human understanding. And the pharaohs were not just kings. They were believed to be living gods walking among ordinary people. To understand ancient Egypt, you have to forget everything modern history simplified. Because this world was brutal, powerful, and built on rituals that lasted thousands of years. It began along the Nile, a river that brought life to the desert. Without it, there would have been nothing. No cities, no temples, no pyramids, only sand. But every year the Nile flooded, and when the waters pulled back, they left behind fertile soil. Life appeared where there had been none. Crops grew, communities formed, and slowly, a civilization emerged. But Egypt was never peaceful. From the beginning, it was a land of power struggles. Small kingdoms fought each other for control of the river, because whoever controlled the Nile controlled survival. Eventually, two regions dominated the land: Upper Egypt in the south, Lower Egypt in the north. For generations, they remained separate, until one ruler changed everything. His name was Narmer, and he united Egypt under a single crown. This was not just a political victory. It was the birth of one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. From that moment, Egypt began to transform. Rulers were no longer just leaders. They became divine. Pharaohs were believed to be chosen by the gods. And when they died, they did not simply disappear. They traveled to the afterlife. But reaching that afterlife was not guaranteed. The journey was dangerous, filled with trials, spirits, and judgment. And that fear shaped everything. The Egyptians prepared for death their entire lives, not in fear but in precision. Their bodies had to be preserved. Their names had to be remembered. Their tombs had to be protected, because if any of these failed, their soul could be lost forever. This belief led to one of the most disturbing and advanced rituals in the ancient world: mummification. Not just a burial process, but a transformation of the body into something eternal. Organs removed, body dried, wrapped in layers. Every step performed with religious purpose. Not to honor the dead but to prepare them for what came next. And what came next was judgment. According to Egyptian belief, every soul stood before Osiris, the god of the underworld. Their heart was weighed against a feather, the feather of truth. If the heart was heavier, it meant a life filled with wrongdoing, and the soul would be destroyed, not punished, erased, forever. This was the fate they feared most, not death, but non-existence. And so, Egypt became a civilization obsessed with legacy. They built monuments not for the living but for the dead. And nothing represented this obsession more than the pyramids. The pyramids were not built as symbols. They were built as protection. Protection for something the Egyptians believed could never truly die. When a pharaoh passed away, the event did not mark an ending. It marked a transition. Because in Egyptian belief, death was not the final stage of existence. It was a passage into another realm. But this journey was dangerous, and only the most prepared could survive it. The pyramids were designed to ensure that survival. Massive stone structures, rising from the desert, aligned with the stars. Every block placed with purpose. Every chamber carefully planned. Nothing was random. Nothing was decorative. Everything served a function connected to the afterlife. Inside these structures were hidden corridors, sealed rooms, and traps. Not to protect treasure, but to protect the body. Because if the body was destroyed, the soul could not return. And without the soul, the pharaoh's journey would fail. The construction of a pyramid took decades. Thousands of workers. Engineers, craftsmen, planners. This was not primitive labor. It was organized, precise, and highly advanced for its time. Entire communities were built around these projects. Food, shelter, and medical care were provided. Because the success of the pyramid was seen as the success of the kingdom itself. But beneath the surface of this organized effort there was fear. Fear of failure. Fear of divine punishment. And fear of what would happen if the rituals were not performed correctly. The The pharaoh was not just a ruler. He was believed to be the connection between gods and humans, a living bridge between worlds. If he failed, the balance of the entire land could collapse. Floods could stop, crops could fail, chaos could spread. So every action around the pharaoh was controlled, from birth to death, from ceremonies to daily life. Nothing was left to chance. When a pharaoh died, preparations began immediately. Priests took control. Rituals were performed. Words were spoken that had been repeated for centuries. Because tradition was power, and power meant survival, the body was taken to special chambers. There, the process of transformation began. Not burial, transformation. Organs were removed carefully, each one placed into sacred containers. The brain extracted, the body dried using natural salts. 40 days passed in silence. Then wrapping, layer after layer, cloth soaked in oils, symbols placed between folds, words spoken with every movement, because this was not simply preservation. It was preparation for rebirth. When the process was complete, the body was no longer seen as human. It had become something sacred, something eternal, placed into a coffin, then into another, and another. Layers of protection, layers of meaning, until finally, the body was sealed inside stone, deep within the pyramid, hidden from the world, but not alone. Walls were covered in carvings, bells, instructions, guides for the journey ahead. Because the afterlife was not peaceful. It was filled with trials, creatures, judgment. The soul would have to travel through darkness, through gates guarded by unknown beings, through challenges designed to test its worth. And only if it passed every stage would it reach the field of reeds, a place that mirrored life, but without suffering, without hunger, without fear. This was the ultimate goal, and the reason Egypt invested so much into death. But not every pharaoh achieved it. Some tombs were robbed, some bodies damaged, some rituals interrupted. And in those cases Egyptians believed something terrible happened. The soul became trapped, unable to move forward, unable to return, lost between worlds. And this belief created one of the deepest fears in Egyptian culture. Not death, not pain, but being forgotten. Because to be forgotten meant losing your place in existence. No name, no memory, no afterlife, only silence. That is why monuments were built, names carved into stone, stories recorded on temple walls. Because as long as someone remembered, the soul remained alive. And the pharaohs ensured they would never be forgotten. Their pyramids still stand, their names still spoken, their rituals still studied, thousands of years later. But their true purpose remains a mystery. Even today, modern archaeologists continue to uncover chambers, hidden passages, unknown structures beneath the sand, suggesting that what we see on the surface is only a fraction of what Egypt truly built. And the deeper we look, the more questions appear. Because the Egyptians were not simply building tombs. They were preparing for something. Something they believed was certain. Something they believed was waiting. Beyond death. To truly understand ancient Egypt, you must understand their gods. Because the Egyptians did not see gods as distant figures. They believed they were present, watching, judging, guiding every part of existence. There were hundreds of deities. Some controlled the sun, others the river, others the underworld. Each one represented a force humans could not control. Ra, the sun god, was believed to travel across the sky each day. But at night, he entered the underworld. There he fought darkness, creatures, chaos itself. And if Ra ever lost that battle, the sun would never rise again. This was not mythology to them. It was reality. Every sunrise was proof that balance had survived another night. Osiris ruled the afterlife, not as a king of the dead, but as a judge. Every soul, regardless of status, stood before him. Pharaoh, farmer, child, warrior. No one was exempt. And judgment was final. The heart of the deceased was placed on a scale. On the other side, a single feather. The feather of Mat. Truth, order, balance. If the heart was heavy with wrongdoing, it would sink, and a creature known as Ammit would devour it. Not torture, not punishment. Erasure, complete and permanent. As if the person had never existed. This was the ultimate fear. To vanish from reality itself. And so, Egyptians lived carefully. Every action mattered. Every decision shaped the fate of their soul. Even words were important, because lies could weigh the heart down. The afterlife was not automatic. It had to be earned, but reaching it required more than moral living. It required preparation, bells, knowledge, guidance. The Book of the Dead was created as a map, not a story, a guide, instructions on how to pass each stage of the journey, what to say, what to avoid, which gods to respect, and which dangers waited in the darkness. Because the underworld was not peaceful, it was filled with trials, fire, lakes of darkness, creatures that guarded gates, and paths that could trap souls forever. Only those who knew the way could survive it. This belief changed how Egyptians saw death. Tombs were not final resting places, they were starting points, and disturbing a tomb was considered one of the worst crimes imaginable, not because of treasure, but because it interrupted a soul's journey. If a tomb was opened, if a body was damaged, if sacred items were stolen, the soul could be lost. Trapped between worlds, unable to move forward, unable to return. And this is where the idea of curses began. Not magic, not revenge, but imbalance. People believed disturbing the dead created consequences, strange events, illness, misfortune, because the natural order had been broken. And Egypt was built on order, math, balance between life and death, between humans and gods, between the world of the living and the world beyond. When tombs were later discovered and opened by explorers, stories began to spread. Unexpected deaths, unexplained sickness, accidents. Some dismissed them as coincidence. Others believed something older had been disturbed, something that had been protected for thousands of years. The deeper people went into these tombs, the more they realized how advanced Egyptian rituals were. Hidden chambers, false pathways, stone doors weighing tons, all designed to keep the outside world away. Because once the journey began, it could not be interrupted. Even today, new discoveries continue. Burial sites, unopened chambers, sealed passages beneath sand and stone. And each discovery raises the same question: what else remains hidden? Because Egypt was not built for the living. It was built for eternity, for gods, for souls, for a journey no one could see but everyone believed in. And that belief shaped one of the most powerful civilizations in human history. A civilization that prepared for death more carefully than any other, because to them death was only the beginning. Ancient Egypt is often remembered as a land of pyramids and gods. But for most people who lived there, life was not grand. It was harsh, demanding, and controlled by forces far beyond their influence. The majority of the population were farmers. Their lives followed the rhythm of the Nile. When it flooded, they waited. When the waters receded, they planted. When crops failed, hunger followed. And hunger was common. There were no safety nets, no systems to protect the poor. Survival depended on the land and the will of the rulers. Above them stood the pharaoh, not just a king, but an absolute authority. His word was law. His decisions shaped the fate of thousands, and questioning him was unthinkable, because to question the pharaoh was to question the gods themselves. This belief created total control. Labor was not optional. When massive building projects began, workers were called, not always as slaves, but not always by choice either. Entire villages contributed manpower. Stonecutters, transporters, builders. Men worked for months, sometimes years, away from their homes, living in organized camps near construction sites. These camps were structured, food provided, shelter arranged, medical treatment available, but life was still brutal. Injuries were common, bones broken, hands crushed, bodies worn down by heat and exhaustion. And yet they continued, because these projects were not just construction, they were religious duty. Participation meant serving the gods. Refusing could bring punishment, and punishment in ancient Egypt was severe. There were no prisons as we understand them today. Justice was immediate, public, physical, beatings, forced labor, mutilation in extreme cases, because order had to be maintained, and fear maintained order. The legal system focused on balance. If someone disrupted society, they were removed from it, not always through execution, but through pain, through humiliation, through permanent marks. Doctors existed, and surprisingly, Egyptian medicine was advanced. They understood fractures, infections, basic surgical techniques. But their knowledge mixed science with belief. Bells were spoken during treatments, amulets placed on wounds, because illness was not always seen as physical. Sometimes it was spiritual, a punishment, a warning, or a disturbance in balance. And while common people struggled daily, the elite lived in another world. Temples filled with wealth, homes decorated with gold and rare materials, servants attending every need, education reserved for the few. Scribes held immense power, because writing meant control. Records, taxes, orders, everything documented, everything tracked. The system was precise, and at the center of it all stood the pharaoh, his image carved into temples, his name repeated in rituals, his presence everywhere, even when he was not physically there. He represented stability, divine order, continuity. But history reveals something else. Not every pharaoh ruled wisely. Some were ruthless, paranoid, obsessed with control. They eliminated rivals, erased names from monuments, destroyed records of those who came before them. Because in Egypt memory meant existence, and erasing someone's name was like erasing their soul. Entire reigns were rewritten, truth reshaped, history controlled, and the people never questioned it, because they believed the gods had chosen their ruler. And the gods could not be wrong. This created one of the most stable civilizations in history, but also one of the most controlled, because life in Egypt was predictable, structured, bound by tradition, from birth to death, and beyond. For centuries, people believed the pyramids were built by slaves, massive labor, chains, endless suffering. But the truth is more complex. The pyramids were built by organized workers, skilled laborers, farmers during flood seasons, craftsmen who understood stone like no one else in the ancient world. This does not mean the work was easy. It was relentless. Stones weighing tons moved across desert terrain, ramps constructed and rebuilt, blocks aligned with precision still difficult to replicate today. The environment alone was deadly. Heat, dust, injury, exhaustion. Many workers died during construction, not in chains, but in service to something they believed mattered beyond their own lives. Because building a pyramid was not seen as labor, it was participation in eternity. Every stone placed meant securing the pharaoh's journey, and by extension protecting the balance of the world. Egypt survived for thousands of years because of structure, tradition repeated without change, knowledge passed down carefully. Priests preserved rituals, scribes recorded events, architects studied the past before building the future. This stability created strength, but it also created rigidity, and rigidity eventually leads to fracture. As centuries passed, the cost of maintaining this system grew. Massive temples, endless monuments, large priesthoods, all requiring resources. Taxes increased, pressure on farmers grew, food shortages appeared, internal conflict followed, and once stability weakens, power struggles begin. Regional leaders gained influence. Local rulers challenged central authority. The unity that once defined Egypt began to fade. Foreign forces noticed. Invaders tested borders. Trade routes shifted. And slowly, the empire weakened. This decline was not sudden. It was gradual, a slow erosion of control. Pharaohs still ruled, temples still stood, but the sense of invincibility was gone. And once doubt enters a civilization, its foundations begin to shift. Even the pyramids, once symbols of eternal power, became reminders of a past that could not return. Generations later, Egypt would fall under foreign rule. Empires would rise over it. Persians, Greeks, Romans, each one absorbing pieces of Egyptian culture, but never truly becoming it. Because Egypt was more than territory. It was belief, a system built on life, death, and what lies beyond. And even as its political power faded, its influence did not. Ideas survived, symbols endured, stories carried forward through time. The pyramids remained, silent, unchanged, watching as centuries passed around them. And even today, standing before them, one question still echoes. How did a civilization so ancient build something so permanent? Because while empires fall, stone remains. And Egypt built for eternity. Even after thousands of years, ancient Egypt is not fully understood. Not by historians, not by archaeologists, and certainly not by the modern world, because what survived is only a fraction of what once existed. Entire cities remain buried beneath sand, tombs never opened, passages never explored, and structures whose purpose we still debate. Every discovery raises new questions. How did they move such massive stones with limited tools? How did they align monuments with astronomical precision? How did knowledge survive across thousands of years without modern systems? These are not simple achievements. They suggest planning beyond generations, a civilization thinking in centuries, not years. And that kind of thinking changes everything, because Egypt was not building for the present. It was building for permanence, for eternity. And eternity requires knowledge, knowledge preserved, protected, hidden when necessary. Many researchers believe much of Egypt's understanding has been lost, not destroyed, lost, buried beneath time, sand, and forgotten language. Some writings remain undeciphered, some symbols still debated, some chambers detected by scanning technology remain sealed. And every sealed chamber suggests one thing: there is more, much more. Modern technology has begun to uncover what was once impossible to see. Ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, digital reconstruction. These tools have revealed hidden voids inside pyramids, unknown structures beneath temple foundations, bases that were never meant to be accessed. And with every new scan, the mystery deepens. Because the deeper we look, the more intentional everything appears. Nothing wasted, nothing accidental. Every line, every chamber, every inscription placed with purpose. This was not a primitive civilization. It was organized, intelligent, and focused on something beyond immediate survival. They believed existence continued, that the soul moved forward, that death was a doorway, and everything they built reflected that belief. But time erodes everything. Languages fade, empires collapse, knowledge fragments, and eventually, only symbols remain. Today, we stand among ruins trying to reconstruct meaning, trying to understand a world that thought differently than we do. A world where death was studied more than life, where rulers were gods, where memory determined eternity, and where being forgotten meant disappearing completely. Ancient Egypt is not just history, it is a reminder of how powerful belief can be, of how far humans will go to control what comes after life, and of how much can be lost even when carved in stone. Because for all we have discovered, most of Egypt still lies hidden, beneath sand, beneath temples, beneath time itself, waiting, silent, unchanged, and perhaps never meant to be fully understood.